Okay, great. Well, again, thank you, Lee, so much for that wonderful teaching on disagreeing better. So many nuggets to hold on to there. And now we get to see it play out in real time. Everybody take a deep breath. Surely there will be some triggering moments for everybody. Possibly. Maybe not. I just want to introduce this group here real quick. Isaac and I have been friends for a long time now because we're getting older, and so when we started, we actually did go to Bible college together. We didn't know each other then. We connected later at a camp in which I was leading worship, and he was doing some other things, and then we were involved in a young pastors cohort together when we were young pastors. Now we're older pastors. And he has been a conversation partner for me for the last 12 years of my life, where we've processed a lot of the things that we're talking about tonight and every other thing. He's just a wonderful, dear friend, and he is going to be moderating the panel tonight because we realized this is how great a thinker he is. If we have 4 panelists, that doesn't give each of them enough time to share. And so he said, hey, let me moderate, and then we get to hear more from the actual panel, which I thought, yes, and then I don't have to do it, which is wonderful. Nikki and I have been friends for just a little bit less than Isaac and I, and Nikki was actually the first person I reached out to 9 years ago when I tried to do this very thing, to have this sort of thing happen at my last church, and then I got called to a different church. And so it never happened until now. Nikki is just an incredible man who I look up to for many different reasons. He's hosted me in his home. He's fed me good food. He's intelligent and compassionate and kind, and though he and I differ greatly in political viewpoints, it doesn't matter because I know he is with me and he is for me, and that's how he lives his life with everybody I know he encounters. So I'm so excited that, Nikki, you're here. Stacy and I have been friends also for a long time. She was a part of my last church. We met at the church before that, and we have shared life together along with Audra for over 10 years now. Almost. Since 2009. So even longer than I thought. That's right, because, yes, a long time. And she has twins. We have twins. We bonded. That was our initial bonding point. She's now serves as an executive pastor in Oak Harbor, Washington, and she is also a financial guru. If you need any help with your finances, ask Stacy. She's the best at it. And Mark is a new friend who is one of my favorite comic book writers. And something that I loved about this, as we've been working with Cure P&W, and all the different partner organizations were saying, hey, we want to come. Full disclosure, I began feeling like, oh man, it's like a little too Christian to have a bunch of people who might not be, share the same things. And so I thought, we need representation or we're not like actually building bridges at all. We're just creating another echo chamber with people who disagree in the church. Well, we get enough of that all the time. So Mark is one of the most thoughtful writers in all of comics and beyond comics. His comics to me, I sent one of them out. I don't know if you got it. Please read it. Okay, some people read it. It's amazing. It's amazing what he is doing. His comics make my heart sing the same way that a good sermon does, or a good book, or anything. And so it's been a joy getting to know Mark. He's received more applause in this church than any other speaker we've ever had. I think 3 different points. When we brought him in for a conversation, the room erupted in applause. And when we began talking as the Building Bridges team about who do we need to round out, because we were like, who's some, progressive Christian we can have? And somebody said, well, why do we need a Christian? And why can't we have Mark back? And I was like, yes, let's bring Mark back. He is brilliant, and I would pay money to watch a conversation happen between Mark and Nikki, especially. And now we get to do that, and we didn't have to pay any money. And so with that, I will let them all self-identify where they are, and Isaac's going to take it over from here, and we get to enjoy watching maybe being inspired and being curious and practicing our own way of compassionate listening. All right?
Well, thanks, Andy, and thanks for everyone for being here tonight. Andy has said now, I think 3 different times, that you are going to witness us doing it correctly. And I'm really grateful for the faith that he's placing in each of us, and hope that we can deliver as we talk through various dynamics that are affecting all of us in our lives, in our relationships, just at our table. We talk through how it came down to not just abstract people out there, but family members and people that are important to us. For some of us, even children, siblings, and these kinds of conversations, and wanting to share with others and be able to assert, but not create the kind of polarizing division or continue to create that is within our culture. So thank you. I appreciated that Lee really helped us with the bridge metaphor, thinking through what a bridge can be. And as I was reflecting on that earlier today, just thinking about preparing for tonight and this exchange, I just had this thought that every bridge, there's some components of that bridge that are interlocking. And whether that's like a male-female interlocking, that there are components of what it means to put together a bridge that require difference. And one way that we could think about those interlocking pieces is that the opposite one is looking for its match, and it's looking for its completion, and it's looking for it to be filled out and finished by the other piece so that it can come together and create what we're talking about, a pathway to come together. And so what you're going to experience with the panel, we hope tonight, is that as people make their assertions or identify where they're coming from and what they think, also the panelists are charged with seeing in the other the potential of coming together. And we're going to require of them to even repeat back and take into each other one another's divergent views and muse on and think about how their view might be important to their own. In other words, we hope that there is some actual coming together. And that's what we hope to achieve here tonight. And so we've worked on this a bit, knowing that we had to do some pre-work. And so we have some questions that have been formed, and we'll walk through that. And also we will give some room for some more spontaneous interaction with one another. You guys ready? All right, let's jump in. So here's the first question they're all going to answer. And this will divulge where they're coming from. What personal experiences or core values have shaped your political perspective, and how do you believe this perspective contributes to human and communal flourishing? And for this question, we'll just go from my left and all the way through. So what personal experiences or core values have shaped your political perspective, and how do you believe this perspective contributes to human and communal flourishing?
All right, thank you, Isaac. And again, thank you, Andy, for inviting me. My name is Nicky. I am MAGA. Okay, I'm just putting it out there. My wife, Kelly, was a candidate for the United States Senate in Alaska, was endorsed by Donald Trump. I've met Donald Trump. I've spent time with Donald Trump. I wouldn't say I know him very well, but I've had the chance to meet him behind closed doors and see a little bit more about who he, I believe, truly is. So I've outed myself there. I am a staunch conservative. I am the product of a very liberal education. Went to Amherst College in Western Massachusetts, met and married my wife in Harvard Law School. But my worldview, my values, my core values have been shaped by my faith. And there's a particular passage of scripture, I'm going to sort of paraphrase it, but it basically says that God loved humanity so much that he sent his son to die for our sins so that we could have everlasting life, that we mattered so much to the infinite God of the universe, that each and every human life did, that he was willing to do that. And so my values begin and end with that truth. And my core value is that every human life is sacred, absolutely sacred. And I have had I think it's been a privilege, but there's been a trauma that's come with it, of experiencing why that is so critically important to be embraced by any civil society that wants to thrive and that is truly committed to human flourishing, not just in word, but in action and in deed. My father is a former political refugee, child political refugee, the youngest son of a widowed political refugee. He's a former political prisoner who was almost killed by the dictator of the land of my ancestors, which is Democratic Republic of the Congo. I grew up the first half of my childhood in Africa. My mom's from Minnesota, so this was a real cross-cultural bridge building, right, affair here. But I saw a lot of what happens when human life isn't seen as sacred, when people are dehumanized. And it's amazing how quickly that can happen and how fast violence and some of the worst human atrocities you can imagine follow. And so I came to the United States just for college and grad school. I'd never lived in the US. I was born an American citizen, but I'd never lived in the US. I didn't know if I was a Republican or a Democrat, but I just came with a core set of values based on my lived experiences. And my experience was what I found was that many of my peers took for granted the very freedoms and professed values they said they were committed to. And so I've watched as I felt like our country is headed in the direction of some of these other countries where I've lived where things haven't actually turned out so well. So that's why I believe what I believe, and that's why I have those convictions.
Thank you, Nikki.
My name is Stacy, and my core values, same faith, plays a huge role in that. I have a very strong social justice part of me that's on board. Equality, fairness, that sort of thing. Kind of a natural bent to speak for the underdog or the oppressed or people on the fringe. I would say recently, not really recently, but yes, recently, I was married for a number of years. I'm divorced now. I'm basically removed from domestic violence. And that has very much shaped during my marriage as well as after the fact, shaped my view of my political views as far as I'm a moderate liberal. I'm not super progressive, but definitely lean toward the liberal side. I'm looking for help for those who need it, particularly women. Also being a woman, growing up in the workforce, managing money, always having jobs with finances. I've come up against that glass ceiling time and again, and just the differences in pay, in treatment, in the workforce. So I think there's still more to be done. We've come a long way, but I believe there's still more to be done. And so those things kind of shape my view and my vote. And I think that's all for now. We'll get into it more.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy.
Hi, my name is Mark, and there's probably a reason why they sat me on the far left of the panel. I consider myself a progressive in that I believe in human progress, and not only human progress, but technological progress, which I don't think any of us don't believe in, or political progress that needs to happen in order to keep abreast of the social and the technological progress, which is why I consider myself to be a progressive, generally speaking. I think that my philosophy, you'll bear with me because this sounds stupid, but is that you can approach life like it's a war, or you can approach life like it's a party. And I think we'll all have a lot more fun if we approach it like it's a party. And a good party is one where everyone's having fun, everyone gets access to the chip bowl, there's plenty of punch to go around. And so I think my values are kind of informed by what would make a good party, and just wanting everyone on planet Earth, especially my fellow Americans, to have a good time while we're here. I think that for a long time, and I think one of the things that really informed my values is just the study of human history and current events. And what I learned was that like what we actually, our institutions that we have now are actually just been around, we just invented them yesterday. In terms of human history, we've been around so much longer than governments or nation states or elections have been around. And for most of human history, we lived together as small families, small familial hunter-gatherer groups. And we didn't need governments because we took care of each other as family. And of course, now that we have civilization, no one wants to go back to that because, you know, we got bacon-wrapped things and, you know, we got the internet and TV, and no one wants to go back to, you know, watching a cave painting for fun. So I think the question is, how do we take advantage of the good things that civilization gives us while still finding a way to treat each other as family, like we did for thousands and thousands of years? And I feel like that's the goal of human civilization, and that's what sort of guides my politics.
Thank you, each of you. You can see the continuum that has been created here, that we have, you know, left to right and somewhere in the middle. And I would guess you can find yourself in that. An interesting question we wanted to pose, just recognizing that as we live through life and we make these assertions and have these conversations with people, and then also as we tend to identify with people who are kind of like us, we begin to discover that there are assumptions that people begin to make about us that are seemingly unfair. Or perhaps they do rightly assume them. So here's the question. What do people wrongly or rightly assume about you because of your political perspective? And whoever would like to answer this one first, jump in. What do people rightly or wrongly assume about you because of your political perspective?
I'll start. You're kind of an anomaly here in Portland, but in many places, as a Democrat, people don't think I can be a Christian and a Democrat. The kind of evangelical national idea of a Christian is a staunch Republican. Is Nikki right here, who I have met today. I love this guy, you guys. I know we're supposed to be opposed, but really, he's wonderful. Okay, sorry. No, we're gonna have hard debate, Nikki. They think that. I also, I believe in the sanctity of life for all people, and I don't necessarily prioritize babies over others. And so that sometimes, you know, I get the kind of the line that I've heard from people is, you just want to kill babies, which is unfortunate that's, you know, it's one of those stereotypical things that's just not true. But that's something that comes up.
Thank you. Mark or Nikki?
Yeah, I think the thing that people assumes, and not without reason, is that I'm just this laundry list of policy positions. It's like, oh, I'm just a checklist of predictable, you know, liberal platforms. And but if you gave me the choice, I would rather have none of the things I believe in law, but have a better process by making laws, have a more inclusive, democratic, robust process that keeps government responsive to what the public actually needs and wants of it, than having all my laws, the things I believe in individually enshrined in law, but no way to change it. Because I think that the government is always maybe 20 years behind the times. It's always sort of behind what the society it governs actually needs. The government is kind of like your grandpa, you know, and by the time he gets a meme or starts using a joke, it's kind of over. So it's like our duty to sort of update grandpa as to like what's happening now, and this is what we need. And no, it's not 1985 anymore. You can't just write a check. This is, I think, our role is to sort of keep grandpa up to date, and you can't do that if you don't have a good democratic process for making people's voices heard through votes and informed votes in elections. And so I would rather have the process than my individual beliefs.
Yeah, so people falsely assume that.
And and that way, if you choose to go against my wisdom and choose other things, you at least are living in a hell of your own creation.
Thank you. Nikki, what do people wrongly assume about you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'm, I come from an interracial marriage, bicultural background, so I have a lot of and really interesting stereotypes that come my way depending on the person. So I would say from my friends on the left, they would say that I'm heartless, and I would say I actually practice what you preach. My friends in the black community would say I'm an Uncle Tom. And then some of my friends to the right of me would say, you're kind of liberal. And so I've gotten the whole gamut, even white folks saying that I might be a racist. So it's just kind of an interesting discussion to have. It's like, really? Okay. So those are some of the things.
Wow, interesting. Now, we want to turn this around a little bit. We would like to hear from each other, maybe respond to the other and say, based upon my view and interacting with people that are coming from your position, here's some reasons why they might think that. And just let that kind of provoke some conversation. So does anybody have a response to the other that might help the other person know, from my view, this is why people might think that?
I'll start, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So from say somebody from the right would ask Stacy how one could make the argument that you don't prioritize babies in their lives over other lives, and how does that not make you someone who prioritized the taking of a child's life over the mother's?
Okay, so sorry.
Sure. So I can rephrase
so
that.
What's the question?
So the question would the question would be, you made the statement, I don't prioritize children or babies, their lives over anybody else's. But people wrongly assume that I'm actually for killing babies, which is totally not the case. So speaking to somebody who has that perspective, like not that I do, but somebody who might have that perspective, how would you convince them otherwise? What would you say to them to help them understand?
I think a lot of it is just the stereotypes and the misinformation that is out there. I mean, it's my mother. I'm going to be honest with you. My mother is a staunch MAGA Republican.
I'd love to meet her sometime.
Yeah, you'd love her. She gives me a lot of narratives that have been fed from the media that she consumes. These are the things I know about, and I have no doubt it goes both ways. This is what I hear about Democrats. This is what I hear about this. This is what they're doing. They don't care. They just want to have sex and get pregnant and have babies and have abortions and do it over and over again as if we are not mothers and women and don't care about our bodies and don't care about a child growing inside of us. Like, it just is, it's inconceivable to me to think that you could just classify half of the country as thinking that way about human life. But in many ways, that's what's portrayed in the media. And so, I guess I would just say, meet me, talk to me. I'm a human being. I love my children. As do every mother I know, every woman I know is, no one takes a decision to end a life lightly. Not anybody that I've met. So, yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I have kind of a version of the same question, in that I would ask this for conservatives in general, but Nikki, since you're the one that's here, I'm going to have to pose it to you. But if you are pro-life, as you say, then why does that require you to, say, ban abortions, but not to, say, ban the chemicals that are being dumped in air and water that cause hundreds of thousands of miscarriages and stillbirths, and that cause millions of premature deaths among Americans worldwide? How can you be pro-life and not also be opposed to those things, in addition to something like abortion?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I don't think you can be pro those things if you can draw a connection to the actual taking of a human life through a chemical in the water or wherever. I think it's largely due to the fact that it's not one of those high-level policy discussions that's happening. I think people are bringing those kinds of things now increasingly to the forefront, about how Americans in general are being poisoned by our food, and by chemicals that we're ingesting without even knowing it. I think that the distinction, perhaps on some level, is not that there's an absolute moral distinction, but we are making choices about, for the most part, what we eat, what we drink. We have some volition, some ability to act or not act. The child in the womb has none of that. It is the most vulnerable state that a human being will ever be in. And so I think that is why, from a conservative standpoint, like, we prioritize that, because if we're going to say we are a society that looks out for the weakest, the most vulnerable among us, it has got to begin with the weakest, most vulnerable among us, and that is the child in the womb. And my contention, I think that of many others like me, is you can measure the health of a society by a lot of different things. I don't want to be absolutist about it, but one of the key metrics is, how does a society view life, and how does a society treat its children? And if we begin with a society that is very adamant about the taking of innocent life, then it gets a little sketchy. Because I'll say, as an African American, anytime we were dehumanized, and that was the justification for slavery and for killing. The Jews were dehumanized, and that was the justification for what the Nazis did to them. Anytime humanity is engaged in the dehumanization of any human being, it's resulted in very serious moral consequences. And so I feel like an abortion is an analog of that, because part of that has been, we've had to dehumanize a child in the womb in order to justify the act of it. And I think that's very different from, policy issues where we're allowing companies to do things with the water and stuff that really shouldn't be done, and that we do need to do something about. The consequences are much more immediate with abortion.
Does anybody have a question for Mark? Oh, yes.
I
Sure,
do
go.
have a question for Mark. So you talked about, the process as being more important than your personal views. What happens when the process directly conflicts with your personal views?
Well, I think the process should win, because this is what determines the long-term health of a civilization, as opposed to the things that I believe in and believe in strongly and don't think they're trivial. These will determine policy for maybe the next 10 or 20 years. The process by which we elect leaders and pass laws and respond to the needs of society as they change, that's something that will determine the success or failure of our civilization. And so I think that's got to take precedent over pretty much any policy consideration.
Okay, I'm just going to insert, and we'll do this later too. What of the others' positions so far has seemed like, oh, that's reasonable and I can understand, and I value that?
Well, I really value what Mark just said, and I'm in, as they say, heated agreement with you.
As they say.
on the importance of process, because if you have an ends justifies the means approach, it doesn't work in a civil society. We need, in order for justice to be done, it must be seen to be done. And a process that is not a legitimate process will never achieve an outcome that the populace can actually embrace and accept. So I am more inclined to, I can I can submit to a result or an outcome that I disagree with if the process was legitimate. That's what we have in our theoretically in our society, right? Like, you have democratic elections, you may not agree with the outcome, but you submit to it because the process that led to it was a fair and legitimate one. So, yeah.
I agree with you on the sanctity of life. I think that's all I want to say. I think we agree on that. Yeah. I feel like, and we might get into this a little bit more, I feel like we don't live in a perfect society. You know, you talk about poison in the water and the food. I mean, I think that, there are all kinds of ways where that's being, it's not being upheld. And so it's kind of like, which do you choose? And I don't mean choose, because obviously we want everyone to survive and live and flourish. But in our current political climate, the way we're currently structured, we're really presented with a choice, basically. We've been unfortunately presented with the idea of, you need to pick one, this or this. I think Christ would say you don't. But so I agree with the sanctity of life. Yeah. Yeah.
And I agree with Stacy, I think, about what she said about women's justice issues being particularly important. Not only because they were ignored for, the first, several millennia of civilization, but also because they're half the population, so that level of equality, as new as it is sort of like the biggest single thing you can do to improve human life on the planet, is by making sure that women are educated, make sure that women are economically empowered, making sure that women have opportunities. And it's not only just because it's nice and fair and to them, though trust me, that's enough. But it's not just because of that. It's because the challenges of the 21st century are so great. It's like we are facing resource depletion like the human race has never experienced before on this planet, global warming that threatens our habitat. We are facing challenges from artificial intelligence and the automation of our workplaces. Things are changing more rapidly now than they ever have before in human history. And I think our only real defense against that, or the only way we have to sort of ensure that we are up to the challenges of this century, are to make sure that we are unlocking the talents of everybody, to make sure we're finding the best people who are the best at solving problems and matching what the problems are best suited to. And that, you can't do that while ignoring, the talents of half the population. You've got to find the scientists who are going to cure cancer wherever they may be, and there's a 50% chance that's a woman. You've got to find the person who's going to find a solution to save the human race against the changing the pH in our oceans and the increasing heat on Earth. And there's a 50% chance that person's going to be a woman.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah. So what we hope that we're modeling is that they are listening to the extent of wanting to find levels of agreement. Again, those interlocking pieces coming together. We've begun to answer this question to some way, but you're each going to have more opportunity to express. The question is, what is the most pressing issue that guides your civic engagement, whether that's how you vote or other actions civically, and why is it so important to you? What is the most pressing issue that guides your civic engagement?
Well, I'll start that one since I just went on my tirade, because it's related. But I think, my most pressing civil engagement issue is this unlocking the talents of this and the next generation? Are we educating people and unlocking their talents so they can begin offering real solutions to the problems that are threatening our species?
Well, that was quick.
Yeah. No.
Okay, I'm stealing your time. Mine are the women's issues and economic policy and mental health. I think they kind of all go together. I've worked in finance most of my life. I believe that trickle-down economics generally doesn't work. I think it works for the top half of society, but not for the bottom half. There's still a great chasm there. And so financially, I tend to lean on the Democratic side as far as what works. I think we need a lot more money in programs for mental health. I think we need a lot more money in programs for women. Being a person who did get out of domestic violence, but a person who is educated and intelligent and has a job, knows how to pick up the phone, speaks English, knows how to navigate the system for the most part. I was shocked at the lack of help for someone who is capable, let alone someone who is not capable. And I think we just continue to see this gap between those who have and those who don't. And I'm not an advocate for just throw all the money at everybody and give them whatever they want. I think there needs to be structure. I think there needs to be plans. I'm not a socialist per se, but I do think we need to have a lot more invested and economic plans that narrow that gap. It just continues to grow and grow and grow. And so I think we need to narrow that. I think people in the lower and middle class need to have what they need to be able to move up, to be able to get to that next step, and people in the lowest class, which tend to be immigrants, women, orphans and immigrants and widows from Scripture, tend to be in that class. I think as a society and just as a part of my faith, I feel called to those people to be doing more to reach them.
Before I answer that question, I just want to make sure I address something that I should have been very clear on, I think, a little earlier. And whenever I'm talking about sanctity of life issues, I want to recognize that in a room where there are women, there may be women who are post-abortive. And I want to be very sensitive to that and to say that anything that I talk about as it relates to the sanctity of life is not meant as judgment or condemnation in any way, shape, or form. I am very sensitive to it is always a difficult issue for somebody in that circumstance. But to specifically answer that question, sanctity of life is the issue that is for me, the most important civic issue. And this is why. Because everything that we really care about, including the things that Mark and Stacy, flow out of a conviction, an understanding, and a belief in the sanctity of life. Our founders understood that. They didn't live it out in the best ways, right? This has been a progressive process. But they began the Declaration of Independence with, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident meaning they don't depend on my personal opinion or your personal opinion. It's not my truth or your truth. That these truths exist independently of us. They are self-evident truths. That all men are created equal. And that we all have the right to life, and that was the first thing they said. And then came liberty, and before they had pursuit of happiness, they had actually property. But the idea is, without a belief in the sanctity of life and an honoring of that, you can't really fully honor another person's right to freedom, the right to voice their own opinions, the right to equal protection under their laws, the right against cruel and unusual punishment. All those flow from an understanding of the right to life, even issues as they relate to economic equality. All of those things come together. I've had a lot of conversations with my dad about him growing up an impoverished child, one of those kids you see in Africa with the bloated bellies, right, and the red hair, before he was able to work his way out of all of that. And he will say that in some instances, handouts and support are helpful, but really what people need is a hand up, and that it can become very dehumanizing, and it has become very dehumanizing for many in African countries just to get handouts, because it creates a culture of dependence and a feeling like I can't do it myself. I really need you, right? And so even as we think about these kinds of things, balancing our policy prescriptions, I think, are coming from the same place. We value human life. Mark and Stacy would say the same thing from their own perspectives, that they value human life. It's just how does that work out from a policy perspective? And that's, I think, really where we would differ. But I think everything flows from that.
I'd be curious. Let's start with Mark. Stacy, would you repeat back to us what you heard Mark saying? Now I'm challenging you here because Nikki just talked, and Mark talked about empowerment of the next generation. Share with him back what you hear him saying, what seems to be important to him based upon what he's said so far.
Well, I think he values those coming after us. He values encouraging women, encouraging the next generation, giving everyone an opportunity to participate in our process so that our society can flourish. He values parties over war. The punch bowl of the sandwiches. I think he just very much values making sure everyone has a seat at the table, making sure that our process allows for that, and allows for everyone to be represented.
Mark, what do you hear Nikki expressing?
Well, I hear that he does not want to see this country turn into the sort of civilization or the sort of country that his family left, which is 100% understandable. I might disagree with him on the particulars of what will best keep us from devolving to a tyranny, but I think that's a value we both share. Because I think we both see that when you cut the leadership off from the people they're leading, it's gonna not result in anything good for the people that are being led. And I really appreciate that, and especially from his perspective, I think it adds a lot of gravity to what he's saying.
Thank you. Nikki, what's Stacy expressing so far? What seems to be important to her?
Yeah, well, I think there have been a number of things that have really struck me about what you've shared, Stacy. But I'm hearing from your faith background and from your experience, personal experience, that you're passionate about the underdog, the person who's vulnerable, the person who needs a voice and an advocate. And women are very much among those particular women who are victims of domestic violence, and the poor and the orphan and the widow. And those were the most vulnerable in society back in what we might say is, in terms of Christian lingo, biblical times, but really all of our times are biblical times if you're a Christian. But in history, but they also happen to be very much today, particularly the immigrant. And so I hear you saying that our policies and the way we approach things need to ensure that we are providing a way for the vulnerable and those the have-nots to come to a place where they become the haves, and the disempowered where they also become the empowered.
Here's another question. If the three of you had to align yourselves towards advancing some policy decision, what theme do you think would be something that all of you could rally around together and go into the courtroom next door, or the witness stand, or the hearing committee, and be in good faith and good confidence know that you were on each other's team, so to speak? Which theme is emerging?
Well, I think for me, it's the one I'm hearing from everyone is opportunity.
Yeah, I would say civil rights, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Stacy as well. I think civil rights would be something that, now which civil rights we're advocating for would be, but I know that there's civil rights that we would agree on, for sure.
Yeah. What we're doing is creating a new political advocacy group between the three of you.
It's a new PAC.
That's right, a new PAC, a super PAC, tripartisan, that's right. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a minute to think about this, because we're going to go back. There's several things that we thought that you guys might want to ask each other about to further clarify positions or where you're coming from. So each panelist is going to pick another panelist to ask a curious follow-up question. Tell me more about this, and we'll let the conversation go from there.
So I'll start. I really, Mark, you're incredibly thoughtful in how you've, even just the pictures you've given, right? War versus party and those kinds of things, to help people understand your angle and at how you approach things. And I know you're a comic book writer, but you speak.
That's my only qualification here.
I was going to say you speak with some of the heart of a lawyer too, in terms of when you talk about process. At least that was like my love language right there as an attorney. So I want to ask you, about your passion for making sure that processes are fair and just in order for everybody able to respect and submit to the outcome, particularly as it relates to elections. We are all seeing, and I think this is in many instances, not necessarily all, but many people are beginning to pick up on a lot more, that we are seeing a weaponization of our government in the electoral process, largely by partisan apparatchiks in bureaucracies that, in my estimation, is very dangerous for the future of our democracy if it becomes a pattern. What would you suggest we do in order to get back to, America's always had issues with an election system. Blacks weren't allowed to vote, women weren't allowed to vote at one time, right? This has been an ongoing struggle. So this is just a new struggle that we have. What would be your proposal for a solution, and how do we get back to sort of regular order of business, so to speak, as it relates to electoral politics?
Well, I would do two things, because I think there's political machinery machinations on two different important levels. One, in how legislatures and districts are drawn up. So I would come up with the mathematical formula where districts must be shaped this way and extend for X amount of miles in each direction depending upon the population of your state. So there's no judgment by the legislature. They can't go in there and draw like a Smurf, and say this is one district because the people that will vote for me are in this district. And then I would also, I think one thing I would propose that I think would answer both the concerns that people have on the right about voter fraud and the concerns that people on the left have about voter suppression. If we all just went to a national vote by mail system, it is the hardest sort of system to game, because in order for someone to steal my vote in Oregon when I vote by mail, they would have to know when the ballot was coming to my mailbox, steal it, know what my signature looked like, sign it, and then send it in. And they couldn't just make a photocopy of the ballot and send in a separate one, because they have serial numbers on them. And if they got two of the same serial number, it would flag the system. So if you implemented a system like that nationwide, then you wouldn't have, state governments wouldn't be able to rig the election by creating 8-hour lines to vote in the cities versus 10-minute lines to vote in the country. Or they wouldn't be able to they wouldn't be able to hack a voting machine. Even if they did, it wouldn't matter, because there are no voting machines. I think it would be the simplest, easiest way to deal with both sort of the lack of confidence that both sides have in the election.
Nikki, with the sanctity of life being important to both of us, how do you feel about issues like capital punishment? How do you feel about people who are seeking asylum, particularly at our southern border, with just the wave of immigration happening there?
So those are great questions. So on the capital punishment issue, it's great that you brought it up. I actually wrote my third-year paper in law school on a biblical perspective on capital punishment. Yeah. So what I would say briefly is, I think you can go either way on it based on a perspective of the sanctity of life. You can go from a perspective of, because life is sacred, if you take life in order to emphasize how sacred it is, you will forfeit your own. You could also take the view, and I tend to be more of this persuasion, that because life is sacred, even if you take another life, while you might be put in prison for the rest of your life, I'm not going to advocate for the taking of your life. And I want you to have the opportunity to change. And the longer I let you live, right, the longer the state lets you live, the longer you have that opportunity to perhaps become a better person, even if you never leave those prison walls. So the sort of the part of my faith that believes in grace is the part that would lean in that direction. I believe that's also how our friends in the Catholic Church also lean. On the immigration side, I think this is such a complex topic, so I'll try to make it really brief. But we need to remember, from a sanctity of life perspective, that there are sacred lives on both sides of the border. Okay, if we start from that perspective, and remembering also that I'm the son of an immigrant who became an American citizen just 10 or 15 years ago, and went through the process legally. I The way I view this is we need to take seriously the needs of the people who are struggling to get into this country. There are a lot of people who are desperate to get in, not to commit evil, but to pursue a better life. But we need to have borders and a system in place to make sure that the people we do let in are not criminals, terrorists, people who are going to do harm, number one. I don't think that's anti-sanctity of human life. That's actually consistent with that approach. I also think that we need to make sure that we have the resources to care for the people that we're bringing in, as well as the people for whom the government has responsibility already to take care of. It's really no different than what we would do with our own homes. Most of us have gates, or maybe at least a door to our home. We don't just let anybody in. We want to be hospitable, but the people we do let in are generally people we trust aren't going to hurt our families. And if we see somebody in need and we have an opportunity to help them, I think most of us in this room would love to be able to do that, bring a person in and say, let me help you. But I don't think most of us would say, open the doors to our home and say, anybody wants to come in, come on in. You can sleep in my daughter's room. I don't care who you are or what you've done, and help yourself to anything, our food, our money. We would have a process in place to make sure that we're able to take care of our own and take care of them. And that's just kind of how I see immigration. I think what we've seen right now with our immigration policy has been a catastrophe from a human rights perspective, because we have hundreds of thousands of children who are being trafficked. I've been involved in the fight against trafficking for over a dozen years, and so it's a particular passion of mine to know that over 300,000 kids are likely labor trafficked or sex trafficked, have been through what we've done. I don't think it's compassionate. I don't think it's humane. And I think there are policies that we can put in place that are much more balanced. And so I actually don't think we're as divided as Americans as those who are kind of dividing us would like us to be honest.
Thank you. Mark, do you have a follow-up curious question for one of our panelists?
Yeah, my question is for Stacy. Say I gave you like a chip, and with this chip, you could do one thing to help women in this country. What would you use it on?
That's so good.
That's a really good question.
Andy's going to fire me as moderator.
No cash value.
Cash value. What would I use it on? There's so many things I want to eat. I think. I know. That's why it's so hard.
No pressure.
Right? Ladies, can I call a friend? Can I reach out to a lifeline? Okay. There's just so many things. I'm like, it could be this. It could be this. I feel like it would have to be. I know, right? I think being a finance person, I think I have to start with equal pay. I think, the scripture says the love of money is the root of all evil, which I believe to be true, but, we all need it to live. And I think money often speaks to where our hearts are. It speaks to the things inside of us. And I was telling these guys earlier, the way you spend your money tells a story about who you are. Or who you want to be. And I think if we started with equal pay across the board in every field for women, that sets the stage for at least an equal starting point where we can move forward with that, with our finances. I could have picked so many things, ladies, but that's where with my one chip, whew, yeah.
Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, it's well said. Okay, we're going to do a little thought experiment here. Each of you has to choose one of the other panelists to take with you, and the only thing that you can do is use their position to advocate for something that's important for you.
Oh, that's so good.
Can I just say that these were not on the study page? Isaac, can I just...
I'm a Christian, I'm filled with the Spirit, and so...
Can you repeat the question? I think people were...
I think what I said was that you have to choose one of the other people and one of their positions that they stated to advocate for your own interest or priority.
I'll start. I want to use Nikki's position as like stirring sort of testimony about his background to support my position of why continuing to be a robust democracy where we have trust in the process is so important, because it's still among the very best systems on earth, and we could do so much worse and probably will if we don't pay attention.
I know, to be fair, I should choose Mark, but I think I'm also going to choose Nikki. For the advocating of civil rights and the lifting up of the value of human flourishing and human rights, I think could go a long way for women.
Well, that means I need to pick one from each of you. So thank you for that, Stacy. So for Mark, I would actually, I would pick, Mark, your passion about the poisoning of our society by major food companies and others, pharmaceutical industry and whatnot. And I would take that to as an advocacy point, using my convictions about the sanctity of human life, and that this is destructive to the human person, and so we need to find a better way. And then for Stacy, I would take your passion as it relates to women who've suffered domestic violence, and your passion on immigration, and advocate for that, using my passion for the sanctity of human life as well. So that's why I like to start with that, because I feel like we can all find things that we can agree with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, we're kind of coming to the end, and then I'll have just a final couple of comments and things that are in my heart and mind. But what brings you hope for your community and our country beyond November 6th?
I'll start off by saying Stacy and Mark. give me hope. But really, from my faith informs everything I try to allow it to inform everything I say and do. And the Bible says that this is a long story, and it's a hard story, but it's got a really cool ending that leads into an even more glorious beginning. And so I look forward with hope to the end of history that leads to the beginning of a new history, when God will make all things new, and these things that we are so passionate about will all come to full fruition and will all be taken care of. And I believe it's going to be to your point, biggest party ever, forever. And so I can't wait.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it was the last election cycle in our congregation, which is mostly conservative. I was talking with somebody, and they were sharing their frustration with me, and they knew where I stood. And they were saying, well, what about my kids? Like, if it doesn't go, they were very concerned that, if it doesn't go this way, what's going to happen to my kids? And in that moment, I realized, like, they are as passionate about their issues as I am about mine. And at the end of the day, their question was, what about my kids? And at the end of the day, one of my number one questions is, what about my kids? Like, when you dial all the way down to the heart issue, very few of us are evil, right? I mean, yes, we're all evil continually all the time, according to Scripture, but we we want to do well. We have a good heart posture. We just see different ways about going about it. And so the fact that people are passionate about politics, to me, is a good sign, because it means their heart is engaged. It means they care. It means they feel. It would be much worse if everyone was indifferent, I think, and our hearts were hardened. And so I have hope, because people have soft hearts. And I would agree, if we can do more of this, if we can have more dialogue. I spent some time with these guys today, and I just had a great day with them. So, yeah, I think, Lee, you said that it's really hard to hate people up close. And I would very much agree with that. And so I think an open heart posture, yeah, and being in conversation.
Yeah, I think the thing that gives me hope is just young people, because they don't seem to feel nearly as doomed as I think they are. and I mean that as a compliment. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's really heartening because I feel like they're going to face such challenges, and yet they don't seem daunted by it at all. They seem real creative, and they seem excited for the future. And God, I hope they're right.
Oh man, that's a great line. Thank you. I just want you to consider maybe yourself before an hour ago, and if we would have told you that we have a fairly left progressive, some of you that might have been like, you might have had some feelings. If we would have told you that we have a fairly right conservative, or others of you, that you would have had maybe some feelings and apprehension. Some of you might have even had feelings about, oh, we're going to have somebody that's a bit more centrist because the murky middle means nothing. And those are conclusions that you have come to already. But after this conversation, I just want you to think about in your mind how you're feeling about these people and how maybe even the way the conversation has gone has humanized each of them. And in humanizing each of them, we've been able to learn from each other. And we've been able to absorb from one another and see that while there might be difference, there's a whole bunch that we can do together. And I think you guys did wonderfully, and you guys have been a great audience. Thanks for letting us do this. Good job, guys.
You guys are awesome. Thank you. I'm sure 100 questions popped up in your minds. If you didn't jot them down already, jot them down because you will have an opportunity to engage in this dialogue tomorrow at lunchtime. So whatever questions you have for any of these guys, including Isaac, who sadly we didn't get to hear much of his perspective. He'll be happy to share it. He's always happy to share his perspective. And he has well-informed, thoughtful, beautiful perspectives. So we are moving right along, which is nice because this gives us a little bit of time for a Q&A with Lee and some closing thoughts from Lee. And then we have some announcements at the end of things that are coming up that this evening might have piqued your interest on. So Lee, would you come on back up? Everybody okay? Do you need to get a drink? You all right? Let's just keep rolling. Let's maximize time for Q&A with Lee. I'll run around with this one. Do you want to start with anything, or do we just want to jump in? Let's just jump in. First hand. Who are you pointing at? Oh, Perry.
Lee, I don't remember the exact quote in your presentation, but it was about casting a just and loving attention towards someone. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the word just. That sort of modifier of attention, I wasn't sure I was quite getting.
That was a quote from, it was David Brooks quoting who? Somebody help me. Iris Murdoch, yeah. And I've not read Iris Murdoch yet, but I would, my bit of commentary on that would be one of the things, one of the formal definition of justice going back to Plato, Socrates, is that justice is to give what is due to whom it is due. There's a very formal definition that doesn't tell you anything, except it gives you a direction, right? And I think that one of the things we often overlook, I think, in our day and age in thinking about justice is that it is at its heart about fairness, right? And so there's a sort of, I think we can all be reminded of that, whether you're so-called conservative, so-called liberal, we all want to be treated justly, fairly in how we're represented or how we're treated, right? And that's something that I think we can identify pretty easily. You know, we know when we have fairly represented someone or what they're saying. We know when we have unfairly caricatured someone. And so that would be one of the first things I would say is, you know, I want someone to gaze upon me in a way that I recognize myself in their description of me. Another thing I think is interesting is I did an interview with Malcolm Gladwell last November, and he was talking about his work as a journalist and that he had decided that he was not interested in digging up dirt or controversies on people that he was representing in his writing, but that he wanted to represent them in the way that they wanted to be represented at their best selves, right? Now that's obviously something that could be manipulated, so you got to watch that side of it. But I think that notion of fairness in trying to allow someone to let their best self be shown in the world is another sort of interesting kind of way we could go with that. So thanks for the question.
Hi, can you, I think you're familiar with recovery programs, 12-step programs, things like that. What, in your opinion, what is, are those programs, do they have a positive impact on people being able to communicate better and disagree better? Is it, you know, is somebody going through those programs create a positive impact on them?
I would say my broad answer to that question would be yes, in the same way that people going through church has a positive impact upon them, which we all know means a lot of times it does and sometimes it doesn't, right? But I think so far as I remember the first time I ever went to a 12-step meeting was with a family member who had been in recovery for some number of years at that point. And what I said to him after it was over was, I think that's the most honest room I have ever been in. And that's one of the things, and then I've been in lots of those rooms through the years, and I think that sort of capacity to be vulnerable about one's deepest struggles, you know, lets down the easy categorization that we do of one another, because we can identify our own brokenness and the brokenness of another person, and then the differences that we have get put in a different category. They're all of a sudden they're put in perspective because we see people who are grappling for their very lives because of their powerlessness, and we can identify our own kind of struggles with powerlessness. And that just puts us in a different place with each other, right? And so when there, you know, it's the old thing about if you have a common enemy, then you can be friends, right? And so if you have a sort of common enemy in addiction or a common enemy in powerlessness that can kill you, then I still may think that you're crazy about A, B, or C, but we both know that we might die, right? And so I think that sort of putting things in perspective is a very, very powerful move.
This is a little bit question based on some of your writings too, but do you think a Christian should, do you think it's a good Christian goal to try to enact Christian ends through the state? Or should Christians act outside of the state? Does that question make sense? Yeah.
Yes. no. I mean, so should we act within the parameters of the state to enact some of our goals? Well, that was one of your questions, right? I would say yes and no. I mean, I think that one of the things that we Christians who follow a crucified Lord, who teaches us to love our enemies and teaches us to be willing to suffer even unto death, one of the things that we overlook about that is how that's what states do not do. They just don't, right? And so all of the degree to which the enacting of certain Christian goals and commitments through the power of the state is done, there's always, at best, an ambiguity about that. And so, I tend to think that anyone who doesn't have ambivalence or a deep sense of ambiguity about even the fact of voting has not really thought about what the nation state is. And I mean, take even a seemingly glib assertion like the United States is the greatest nation on the face of the earth, which you can hear Kamala Harris say and you can hear Donald Trump say, right? I mean, that's highly a problematic assertion because, how many of the indigenous peoples of this continent were decimated because of the coming of the white man from Europe? It's clear that our economic well-being rose on the back of slaves. There's no question about that, as far as I know. It's clearly this is what happened, right? And so when you say we're the greatest nation on the face in the history of the world, what? And the point is not to bash America either. There are lots of fantastic things about the United States of America, and if we don't realize that there are great things about this country, then we ought to go try living somewhere else, right? And so I don't take lightly the gifts that come to us from democracy. And I don't think any of us should. But the sort of, if we enter into these conversations, again, to repeat myself, without a sense of the ambiguity of it all, and without a deep sense of ambivalence, then I don't think we have fairly, accurately, soberly grappled with what we have inherited and where we are in the history of the world.
Blythe had one. She was pointing at Tyler.
One of the points in your conversation, you brought it up that you had heard from it might have been an addiction thing. Anyway, but you said if you spot it, you've got it. And I wanted to know if you could qualify that a little bit more. I don't want to push back on that, but I want to, because I think you also followed that up with, if you are spotting that, are you meeting that with grace, with patience, with, meeting that person? And I think that, I believe that it's true, but I'm just curious about where it exists on the scale of if you meet someone, you're actually, it's a family member, it's a friend, it's someone you know well, and you're spotting that and you feel it's fairly extreme, how you approach that in realizing that in some form or fashion, we all got it, whatever it is that we're spotting, right? And probably have everything else that we might not be spotting. But yeah, that's my...
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think, the way the wisdom traditions in biblical literature are often described is that those wisdom traditions describe the way things typically work or often work, right? If you raise up a child in the way he should go, when he is old, he will not depart from it. Is that an absolute rule? No, it's not. We know too many counterexamples. But, generally speaking, does that point some sort of thing that seems to be true? Yeah, I think it does. Or one I really like from the book of Proverbs is something like, if you are lazy, you will have a leaky roof, right? There's something about that that's quite true, right? You're always going to have a leaky roof? No, you might be really good with money and you're not going to fix it, but you got people you can pay to fix it, whatever. So I think with any of those kind of aphorisms, spot it, you got it. This is the same sort of thing. It's a wisdom stating, right? And so it's one of those things that allows us a lens to think about ourselves. And if I am seeing something in somebody else, it reminds me to ask myself, are you sensitive to that, Lee? Because this is something that you particularly fail in. And so it's just a helpful question or a helpful lens, I think, through which to look at myself, a mirror to which to look at myself. So thank you. Helpful.
So earlier, Mark brought up the idea or the thought that many of our institutions and the way that we go about governing ourselves are relatively new in the history of the world. What are some of the things that, a factor or two, that you think might be important for the general person to understand about how differently humans are being asked to engage with the political systems of the world that might be helpful for the Christian or the general public?
Ask me that one more time.
So if what Mark is saying is true, that some of the way that we govern ourselves, maybe government of the people, by the people, for the people, for example, and so us humans are being asked to interact with this, and it's relatively new on the scale of human history. What are some of the factors or the things that we don't really see happening or what's being asked of us that might be important for people to understand, either to make sense of the polarization or to make sense of the difficulty that it seems to be, even though it's an institution that we supposedly treasure?
Yeah, thank you. I am not from a charismatic or Pentecostal background. Our background is my background is very rationalistic. But one of the things that I find so compelling that I wish more social science would get done around in the New Testament is the notion of the principalities and powers. Because I think that we miss a lot of times the way in which power is at work in our society, in our culture, in ways that probably transcends simplistic explanations for what's really going on. Now, I don't think that when I'm raising that stuff about principalities and powers, I don't want to discount the notion of kind of a personal demonic stuff, but at the same time, I think that a broader vision, something, let's say, more social systemic structure stuff beyond Frank Peretti, I might say, I think is helpful here, right? Because there's these systems and structures of power, I think, at play, and we kind of miss it, I think, a lot of times. And so, it's really difficult to know really what's going on in the world, isn't it? And who does really know what's going on? And that's only going to get more and more exacerbated by the continued proliferation of technology, by the rapid rise of AI, and it's going to be increasingly difficult to know what's going on. So those are things that kind of concern me a lot. Is, how are we going to navigate this? And the importance of local communities of discernment is going to be increasingly important.
We got one back here, and then we'll go with Julie.
Hi, I just wanted to hear your words, how you would counsel someone in the really raw human experience of longing for the emotional detachment, not to be reactive, wanting to be regulated so that they can respond, and also dealing with the painful reality and even the impacts of the real social impacts that we're dealing with, or political impacts, and how policies are impacting families. Like, how would you encourage someone? I want to hear how you would encourage a Christ follower and also someone who's not a Christ follower, just in that tension.
Yeah, wow, what a great question. First, I'll begin by saying how I feel like in my own life I've made a lot of progress, and I still haven't made a lot of progress. In my own context in Middle Tennessee and the Bible Belt, there is a lot of stuff happening right now that presses on me personally and communally. And so, I woke up this morning with the very typical physical symptoms that I get when I'm depressed, right across the back of my head. And I know it relates to all this stuff that's going on. And so I think, one, I would just begin by saying, if we feel anxious, if we feel depressed, if we're feeling weight, it's like, well, it's because there are good reasons. There's a lot on all of us. And so first then would just be counsel, let's be kind to ourselves and to one another, because it really is heavy. And then second, I would say, for me, I've just had to work hard on learning a lot about those skills. I've learned, I'd read a lot of kind of popular secondary literature on Stoicism, but this year was the first time I ever went back and I dug up an old translation of Epictetus' Enchiridion. It's only 25 pages long. It's fantastic. I have issues with some of it philosophically, but as far as the practicalities of learning to focus on what you can control and don't focus on what you can't control, it's just brilliant. And I keep going back and rereading it, working on it, journaling where I'm doing well with it and where I'm not doing well with it. And so I just highly recommend that as a sort of very practical guide to detaching. Yeah, Epictetus is his name, Epictetus. He's a philosopher. And it's his Enchiridion, Enchiridion, which just means the manual, a manual for living. Epictetus was the slave of one of Nero's slaves. And so Epictetus' master had been freed by Nero, but was apparently, as you would imagine, somebody who once was a slave of Nero was a tyrannical master himself. And at one point, Epictetus' master was punishing him, torturing him. And the legend is that as Epictetus is under the lash of torture, he says calmly to his master, "If you keep doing that, it will break my leg." And the next thing he says is, "I told you that would break my leg." And then when you go and look for pictures of him, if you just Google his name, you'll see a picture of him with a crutch. So he was crippled the rest of his life. But that sort of way he learned to detach and observe, it sounds wacko, but I need some of that, right? And again, that can become its own sort of unhelpful. You can take that too far, right? Well, there are certain things that I don't want to be detached from. I want to be upset about certain things. I want to be emotionally attached to certain things. But there are other things I need to try to figure out how I can detach, because I'm not doing myself or anybody else any good by being emotionally enmeshed with this thing. So I think that's a lifelong pursuit of human maturation, is to try to do that stuff. Last thing I'll say with regard to Christian theology is that I was telling Isaac this today. I got to teach in Italy, Florence, Italy, for a semester, the first spring semester of this year. And as I was kind of grappling with some of my own frustrations and my own anxieties over things in the Bible Belt and in my context, there I was in Italy, where the Christian tradition is constantly in your face. And the goods of the Christian tradition are constantly in your face. You know, you get to go to Assisi and see where St. Francis literally lived. And you also see the garbage of the Christian traditions constantly in your face. And so you have to kind of have to grapple with this tradition that we're a part of. But I was there for Easter. And so at Easter, the question that I grappled with Holy Week was, you know, do you believe Christ is raised from the dead? And so the conversation I'm having with myself is, well, I've always said I believe Christ is raised from the dead. And if I believe Christ is raised from the dead, well, that's really an outrageous, outlandish claim that really means something if I really believe it. And so it was, if I believe it, then there's the follow-up claim by the Apostle Paul that the power that raised Christ from the dead is at work among us to do far more abundantly than all we can ask or imagine. And this is a radical sort of possibility for a living life that frees us from a certain level of anxiety. And then the second thing, a basic of Christian orthodoxy as well, was that we live, the New Testament claims, between the inauguration of the kingdom of God and the consummation of the kingdom of God. And because we live between the times of the inauguration, when we claim that in Christ's resurrection, death and the power of death was defeated by life, but nonetheless, the long tail of death, the handmaidens of death, still are screwing with us until the consummation of the kingdom of God. And so that means then that the sorry, long tail of the handmaidens of death infiltrate every freaking thing. Every institution, every church, every Christian institution of higher education. Every person, including me. And so what came back to me as I was grappling with that was, so Lee, stop your griping and stop your complaining and acting as if there's any institution that's not infested in its own way by this. And instead, get up and get to work and do what you can to bear witness to the beauty of the kingdom of God. And so it was that sort of stuff, I think, that all of the weight that I think so many of us are feeling pushed me again to get some clarity and try to say, you know, there are lots of people who are able to find some sort of way to live constructively and beautifully in the world apart from that story. We know that, right? But that's the story that I think to be true, and that helps me make my way through that. So thank you, and beautiful question. Thank you.
This will be our last question from Julie, and then we've got a few announcements, and we'll wrap up. So you can offer a closing thought after this, and then I'll come back up.
Thank you, Lee. My question is a bit of a dovetail. As you started to ask your question, I thought, goodness gracious, we're kind of on the same wavelength, I think. And perhaps the question is broader than what you want to get into in this setting, which is fine. No is a complete sentence. But as I understand the time of Christ and the ruling party, if you will, the Roman Empire, there of course was no democracy. And so I have long wondered, how do we, who only, speaking for myself, I only know living in a democracy, how do we live out our calling as followers of Christ when we have been given authority, that we can vote, that we can be a part of the making of the rules of the game, if you will, and how things go. That's so radically different than the life that followers of Christ knew at that time. So I am curious if you have some more thought to share on how do we execute that, or should we execute the authority given to us to be able to vote and still live out a life of acts, of not, we are going to do as followers of Christ what we are going to do to follow Christ regardless of what happens in the nation state, right? I don't see conversation in the New Testament about what Rome, I mean, yes, we all know there was execution that happened, but in terms, I don't see movement to try to influence Rome, to change Rome. I'm an avid voter. I'm not saying not voting, but I'm really curious as you look at how Christianity was started and modeled in that first century compared to what we have in terms of who gets to control the game. What does that look like for a believer? Have we overstepped? Are we in danger of overstepping? Forgive me if I'm not articulating very well.
No, thanks for the question. I mean, that's a huge question and a huge set of questions. And it could be a good, certainly week's worth of lectures. I don't know. Two things that kept surfacing as you were saying, as you were asking that question, is one. I think that one of the things I appreciate so much about the panel was the focus upon the worth of the human being, right? And if you go look at a recent book by the historian Tom Holland, not the actor who plays Spider-Man, but the historian, in his book Dominion, he's not a Christian, and yet what he's doing is he's making the argument that the strengths of Western traditions, Western political traditions that honor the human being as equally worthy of every other human being, comes from the Christian tradition, And that's something that I think is important for us to note. And I think that the way, one of the things I heard y'all saying that I really appreciated is that all three of you said, we better not be taking that for granted. Because there are powers at play in the world who would be fine to screw a lot of everybody else and let them accumulate to themselves and amass to themselves power and wealth and screw everybody else. And as Christians, or as good Americans, that ought to really concern us. And so that's the first thing that kind of surfaced. Then the question about, given our current context, in contrast to first century context, they are very, very different contexts, no doubt about it. And what I thought of there is that my recollection when William Penn, the Quaker, for example, is appointed governor of Pennsylvania. One of the things that Penn and the Quakers try to do is live out the counsels of Scripture in their relations with the indigenous population, right? And so the Quaker folk artist, whose name I'm forgetting, he has all these series of paintings called The Peaceable Kingdom of God, which I'm sure some of you have seen. And some of them, I just love them because in the foreground, you have the lamb lying down with the lion and the child playing over the hole of the viper. And in the background, down by the river, just very small in the painting, you see these Quakers shaking hands with the Native Americans because they're trying to live out in their relations with those people the vision of the prophets of the peaceable kingdom of God. Now, Penn becomes the one who starts, as I remember, don't quote me on this, but this is my recollection from 25 years ago in graduate school. Penn is the one that kind of starts penitentiaries, right? Because you need a place for people to be penitential when they've done wrong, to repent and be rehabilitated, then come back into the community to be of service to the common good. Because he took seriously the reality of sin, but the counsels of the gospel at the same time, right? Another thing that he does, though, is when that they are called to serve in the French-Indian War, they say, no, we will not, because we are followers of the peaceable Christ, and we will not kill our enemies. So we will not help you fight that war. And so there were lines that were drawn. Nope, we don't do that because we're Christians. There are these realities, and so we're called to help run this community, and so we will do this. We'll do penitentiaries. We won't fight. We will be friends with the Native Americans, right? So it's a sort of discernment process that's tricky and messy. And I think at best what we should realize is that we're all trying to do this discernment, and it's messy in our given context. And it's crucial that we realize the ambiguities and do our best to do it in a faithful way, I think, as we encounter it. Thank you. Great. Yeah, thank you. I'll do one last closing comment, and I'll make it really quick. I thought it was lovely that the conversation that y'all had was just great, and it filled me with a lot of hope. I thought, if we can do that kind of conversation, we're going to be okay, And I liked that our conservative and our liberal both pointed to party, and you may or may not remember in Isaiah 25, one of the so-called eschatological pictures of the end of the age is a party scene, and it's a party scene that probably inspires the very end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't know if you remember in the movies, right? The last big scene is a feast. In Isaiah 25, what they have is in the coming day of the Lord, in the final day of the Lord, there will be this great feast, and it says there will be lots of great wine, and then it says there will be high saturated fat food. It doesn't really say that, but it says that there will be lots of bone marrow. So I don't know. That has to be just high saturated fat food. And then it says, if you didn't get it, it says, and there will be lots of wine. And there will be everyone gathered together at the table of the Lord. And isn't that a lovely scene that our good liberal progressive and our good conservative and all across that spectrum there say that, that's what we're longing for, right? And to the degree that we are able, we seek to bear witness to that in our life together, to drink together and to eat together and celebrate together and treat one another as lovely human beings together. So it's been so great to be with you all, and thank you for this wonderful gathering and how great it's been. It's going to be great, Andy. Thank you.